Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. Let's talk boxing. Before we do, I hope you all had a wonderful day yesterday, and I'm not going to wish you a happy new year just yet because I'm hoping to be speaking to you and hearing from you a lot more over the next few days. I'm planning to bring a lot more content, so hit that notifications button. Again, a lot of people have been complaining that you're not getting your notifications. If you unclick it, refresh the page and re-click it, I'm sure it will start to work. If you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, ladies and gents, and we'll be talking a lot more over the next few days. In the meantime, let's talk about yet another historic night of boxing. I say night, but for us here in the UK, it was bright and early after Christmas Day. And for the Americans out there, they had to stay up all night or get up extra early to watch this card because it was out there in Japan, of course. Now you know what it's like to have to put up with what we put up with every weekend. Welcome to our world. Welcome to my world. Won't you come on in? What tune's that? Who sings that? Anyway, that tune I dedicate to you. Now, let's actually talk about what happened here because it was a wonderful card out there in Japan. Before we get on to the historic achievement of Naoya Inoue, let's talk about the co-main event because it was really, really entertaining. It was a barn burner of an affair. It was a potential fight of the year candidate. You had Seiya Tsutsumi go in there against Kazuki Inoue, and what I found beautiful about this particular fight is that Tsutsumi, in my opinion, was clearly at a deficit when it came to talent and skill. And this particular fight was an example of the determination and the ferocity of a fighter who's got dreams and how he was able to overcome a natural talent deficit in what was quite a romantic and poetic way in some ways. It's the sort of fight that you would show a kid and say, never give up, always strive. Because Inoue has a lot of talent, and at range, he was the boss in there. But Tsutsumi kept coming forward. He would not lie down. He would not be denied. He ended up dropping Inoue on 4 occasions and swinging the fight in his favor. By the end of the fight, Inoue could barely stand up. He literally fell after he was clipped with a shot. It was a legitimate knockdown. But it looked like he couldn't stand up anymore. He looked exhausted. He then walks back to his corner, and he doesn't collapse in a scary way, but he does get on his knees in the corner. And afterwards, it did become a little bit scarier because when he's walking out of the ring to go backstage, he's got his arms around 2 of his cornermen and he's walking backstage, and it was concerning. We've seen some dark things in boxing, right? Chris Eubank fights, Nigel Benn fights, you guys know what I'm talking about. Some scary things that you wouldn't wish upon anybody. And so I really hope that Inoue is okay and we see him back in the ring soon. But it was a terrific barn burner of an affair, and you just saw that Inoue, although he had really good skills from long range, he was somebody that wasn't always maintaining that range. And this is why I always say, when it comes to boxing, you have to make the guy do what you want him to do and what he doesn't want to do. If you're the boss when it comes to being at range, he has to earn his entry, punish him for trying to get inside, and make him work consistently to get inside. There were too many occasions where he would allow Tsutsumi, who was bringing incessant pressure, so it's easier said than done, but he was allowing him to enter the pocket a little bit too easily, and he was just pushing him back and then trying to work from there. Get on your bike sometimes. Learn how to move around the ring and just pop a jab out and dictate tempo. It's very important to know how to dictate tempo in boxing. And Inoue, as talented as he is, he was only 6-0 going into this fight, so maybe it's a lack of experience, but he wasn't dictating the tempo. Even Tsutsumi is not exactly highly experienced in that regard in terms of how many fights he's had at the pro game. That was his 10th victory, and he's had 2 draws in the past. So you're talking about a couple of guys that are still learning their craft in some ways, but Tsutsumi now, according to BoxRec, is in the top 10. So, you know, you're going to see this guy and both these guys, hopefully, if Inoue okay, get in the ring in future. And there's a lot of talent in Japan. And I'm going to do a prospect watch video on a couple of those guys, actually, because there are guys out there that you really should be knowing about in the Western boxing world. But moving on from that, let's talk about the main event. If the fight on the undercard, the co-main event, was an example of a poetic and romantic triumph of the human spirit, the main event was somewhat different. The main event was an example that no matter how much of a human spirit you have, sometimes there is just levels. Tapales did certainly conjure up a will to win, and yet the flamboyant display of the favourite's pugilistic arsenal was on full display at points. But defensively, he was being touched. There were moments that he had some problems in there, and a lot of it was to do with some adjustments that Tapales made, and a lot of it was to do with some little, I guess you could call them errors, little things, that choices that Inoue was making, which weren't really the best for him in those moments, in my humble opinion. So let's talk about them. First and foremost, you saw that when Inoue first entered the fight, Tapales was very careful. He had that high guard, and Inoue was able to unload on him at will. Some of the shots are not getting through the guard. That's why he's got the high guard. But Inoue's then starting to use the high guard as cover. You know, he'll start to throw shots behind the guard and stuff like that, making Tapales not see certain shots that were coming. So Tapales tried to adjust, And he started to lean on that back foot. He dropped his lead hand low and he started to lean on that back foot. And he's basically telling him, if you want to come in, you're going to have to, because he was backhand happy at points in Inoue today. If you're going to come in, you're going to have to come through this line whereby I've got my hand lowered and I'm just going to shoot the jab up. So I'm going to create the obstacle of punching you in the mouth every time you try to come through me. Because I'm trying to get behind that shoulder, the left hook's not going to be on for you. That is what he was trying to essentially do. However, having said that, what was happening is that at times when he was getting low in that position and Inoue is trying to edge his way in, he was getting caught with a couple of up jabs. When Tapales would switch up the weight distribution from his back foot to move forward, you would see that when Inoue was sometimes backed up a little bit, he'd put up a high guard of his own. And Tapales would throw a combination and shoot the uppercut through the center line. And he was having some success with that. He was also having success with the up jab when Inoue was being very offensive. Now, a lot of people are being hypercritical of Inoue, saying, he was getting touched a little bit too much. When you're that aggressive, you are going to get touched more. It's kind of like in football, right? Soccer. If you've got an ultra offensive team that wants to go and score 100 goals, they might concede more goals than a defensive team. They might all be elite, right? You might talk about, a top level Italian team or Juventus, say, against a top level like a Manchester City, very open, very attacking. Man City might concede more goals. It doesn't necessarily mean their defense isn't good. It just means that their ultra aggressive approach is going to leave them open at the back. And that's what you started to see a little bit with Naoya Inoue. But the fact that he was always in control and he ate a couple of big shots too, man. This guy's got a chin even in this weight category. And he was talking about the fact that he wants to stay at this division for a period of time. He wants to settle here. And that's a good idea because to become a two-time undisputed champion within a year, right? So he's done it at two separate weight classes in a year and a week. It's pretty extraordinary. I mean, it's historic. It's unprecedented. You just don't get that in the four belt era. It's a very, very hard thing to do. You've got a lot of great fighters that never became undisputed even once. Guys like Floyd Mayweather. To go and do it in two different weight categories in the space of a year, it's just unbelievable. And we'll get onto that in a moment when we discuss who's the pound for pound number one and who's the fighter of the year. For me, it's a two-horse race between Inoue and Bud Crawford. And we'll talk about where I stand on this and we'll get your opinions on that as well in a moment. But with regards to this particular fight, what you ended up then seeing for the stoppage was a backhand from Inoue, which landed flush. Tapales ate it. You saw his head snap all the way back. And he didn't jump on him Inoue. He stayed calm. But then when he followed it up with the second backhand, you saw Tapales go down. It looked like maybe he didn't want to get up, but he did look discombobulated when he was trying to get up even after it had been waved off. So maybe he really just was out of it, zoned out. I can't really say. But he gave a really good account of himself, Tapales. He was rough, he was rugged, and he made those adjustments with his weight distribution that had to make Inoue think. And I liked a lot of what we saw. He was also targeting the body very, very well indeed. And Inoue, as ever, you saw the full distribution of his creative and varied arsenal. It was a brilliant display from Inoue. So who is the fighter of the year and who is the pound for pound fighter at the moment who's at the top spot? They are two different arguments. And ironically, I've been seeing a lot of people on Twitter who have been saying, in my opinion, Inoue is the fighter of the year and Bud Crawford is the one who's the pound for pound number one. I actually think it might be the other way around. And I'll explain why. First of all, let's tackle the question of fighter of the year. Inoue has two terrific victories this year. One over Stephen Fulton, which was considered a 50-50 fight, and he absolutely obliterated him. The other one was Tapales, which was a tougher fight. He got touched a little bit more. He had to think his way through, but he still got a stoppage in the 10th round, and he looked sensational. There was nothing here to suggest that you're going to downgrade him in any way on a pound-for-pound list. This was two fighters, two champions with two belts coming up against each other. You're going to have some areas of success for Tapales. However, with Bud Crawford, he only fought once. And it was a terrific display against Errol Spence. Now, there are a lot of people out there that are telling me, well, Chris, if you fight twice in a year, you've got to go on there as fighter of the year compared to the guy that only fought once. I'm not so sure I agree with that, because when it comes to Bud Crawford, the victory was so significant against an opponent who was significant. Many people had Errol Spence on the pound for pound list. That was a fight whereby people will be talking about it for years. It was spoken about as a fight for the ages, one of the best fights of this generation. Neither Inoue Fulton or Inoue Tapales as individual fights could be put into that bracket. So for me, the method in which Bud Crawford won makes that particular moment stand out potentially above any other in this calendar year. And that's why he deserves to become the fighter of the year. I know there are people out there that will say, but Chris, to become a two-time undisputed champion in just over 12 months is incredible. It is unbelievable. It's historic. I think it's just above a calendar year above 12 months in terms of when he achieved it. However, you also have to understand that the fight against Butler was in 2022. It was in December 22. So if you're talking about the calendar year, you're talking about Fulton and Tapales or Errol Spence. It can go either way. But for me, I lean towards Bud Crawford. I've got a feeling an Asian audience might see it a little bit differently. When it comes to the pound for pound number one fighter in the world, though, then I do think it's Naoya Inoue. And I tell you why I think it's Naoya. Because He's naturally smaller compared to his counterparts than Bud is. You see, the concept of pound for pound was invented to portray who is the superior fighter for their size. They wanted to find a way to give Sugar Ray Robinson plaudits because they knew he's not going to be able to go up and fight a Muhammad Ali. He's just too small. But how do you tell the world this is the most skilled fighter in the sport? So the question was, how good are you for your size? This is why you can go up multiple weight categories, lose a fight, and still be on the pound for pound list. And you have a lot of people that will sit there and go, how is this guy still on there when he's taken an L? It's because he's operating against other elite fighters and he's naturally smaller. If Bud Crawford was to jump up now and go to cruiserweight, for instance, and he was to fight Jai Opataya and get knocked out, that doesn't make Bud Crawford less of a fighter. It just means he went to a position where he fought someone who was just too big. It doesn't even have to be Opataya. It could go and be someone who you consider to be an average cruiserweight. And if he gets knocked out, it's not because they're better than him for their size. It's because they're just too big. And so with that in mind, when you look at somebody like Bud compared to the other welterweights, although Errol Spence is the bigger man, the gap between them isn't as big naturally as Naoya Inoue with some of the people he's operating against. In fact, Tapales today was the first guy that was actually shorter than him, but he was very thick set. Look at the size of his head for a start. Whereas when you look at Fulton was massive compared to Inoue. And it's his fifth weight category that he's operated in, the fourth that he's won titles in. So when you also look at the percentage of body weight, then you start to realize that actually what Inoue is doing here is pretty special. It's pretty incredible. In other words, if I go and put on, 10 pounds and I'm a flyweight, it's a much bigger deal than putting on 10 pounds if you're a light heavyweight, or if you're a heavyweight. If you're a heavyweight, you put on 10 pounds, that's nothing. You can do that because you've had a heavy breakfast. The percentage of your natural weight that you put on or lose is significant, right? And so Inoue is doing something special. So for me, the fact that he's in comparison to his counterparts operating at a level against much bigger men, I think he just shades pound for pound number one. But I've got no problem with who you've got at number one, who you've got at number two, whether it's fighter of the year or pound for pound. Let me know, ladies and gents, where you rank these guys. Let me know what you thought of Inoue's performance. In addition to that, a lot of people are talking about who he should fight next. Some people are talking about Bam Rodriguez. Other people are talking about Tank Davis. Personally, I'd like to see him fight Akhmadaliev. Luis Neri would be a good fight too. But MJ's the fight for me. That's the one I'd want to see him get in there against. In terms of the other two, Bam Rodriguez is naturally massive at his weight division. So the jump to go up a couple of weight categories to fight Inoue, the jump isn't that significant from a natural size perspective. It's probably a negligible size difference. They're probably the same height, same sort of length. Naturally, in terms of width, they're probably, I wouldn't be surprised if Bam walks around bigger than Inoue. Bear in mind, Inoue's been jumping up. But for Inoue to continue to go up to fight Tank Davis, you've got to be realistic, guys. These aren't supermen. Tank's neck is thicker than Inoue's thigh. He's just too big, right? And bear in mind, I was defending Tank when people were expecting him to jump up and fight Devin Haney, when people are talking about bringing Devin Haney's weigh-ins earlier and earlier in the day, which will enable him to blow up massively. And I'm saying they would essentially be two guys in two different weight categories. You can't be agreeing with me there and then also calling for Inoue to jump up and fight Tank. People have to be consistent. I'm consistent on this channel. I don't take sides. Just be consistent with your position. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents, about what we've spoken about. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. God bless.